She stood on the station platform, clutching the baby to her chest, her fingers digging into the thin blanket wrapped around him. The train had left just minutes before, the doors closing with a final clang that echoed in the empty station. She looked around at the few people still milling about, faces she didn't know, and felt a sharp stab of fear. Everything felt too big, too loud, and too unfamiliar. She had planned this move carefully, but now that she was here, it felt like she had fallen into a trap with no way out. The baby stirred, letting out a soft cry. She bounced him gently, whispering words she barely trusted herself to say. Her voice sounded small in the empty air. She had thought she was prepared for this, moving to a new town, starting a new life, but fear had a way of finding cracks in preparation. The weight of the baby in her arms and the loneliness pressing on her chest made it hard to think clearly. Every shadow seemed like it held danger, every stranger a threat. Then she heard the voice, low and steady. "Let me hold you both." She turned slowly and saw a man stepping toward her. He was tall, solid, and carried himself with a calm authority that made her heartbeat slow just a little. There was no rush in his movement, no judgment in his eyes, just a quiet offer of help. She hesitated, unsure if she could trust a stranger in a town she didn't know, but the baby's soft whimper made her decision for her. Carefully, she handed him over. The baby immediately stopped crying when the man held him. He cradled him securely, his arms strong but gentle. She watched him for a moment, feeling a strange relief wash over her. He didn't speak, didn't ask questions, just held the baby and looked at her steadily, as if to say everything would be okay. That alone made her heart flutter. For the first time in hours, she felt the tension in her shoulders ease, and a small, hesitant hope took its place. He led her to a carriage waiting nearby, guiding her with patient hands. As they traveled along the quiet roads leading away from the station, she noticed the town fading behind them and the countryside stretching ahead. The man spoke little, only pointing out familiar landmarks and giving small details about the roads and the town. She realized he knew this place well, and she felt a strange comfort in that. For the first time, she thought that maybe this man could help them find safety. The carriage stopped at a small cabin at the edge of town. The man opened the door for her and helped her inside. The cabin was modest but clean, with a small fire already burning in the hearth. He gently placed the baby in a crib, checking to make sure he was warm and comfortable. She watched him as he moved around, noticing the care in his actions, the patience in his manner. There was something about him that made her feel like she could trust him, and that thought gave her a cautious relief she hadn't felt in a long time. That night, she sat by the fire with the baby in her lap, feeling the exhaustion of the day settle in her bones. The man busied himself quietly, making simple preparations for their first night in the cabin. She glanced at him and realized she had already started to rely on him in ways she had not expected. In that moment, with the baby sleeping peacefully in the crib and the warmth of the fire filling the room, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could be safe here, and that this man might be the person who could help make that possible. The morning light filtered through the cabin windows, and she woke to the sound of the baby cooing softly. The man was already awake, moving quietly around the small kitchen area. He handed her a cup of tea and nodded toward the baby, who was stretching and yawning in the crib. She noticed the way he handled the baby, careful, deliberate, yet completely natural, and it made her chest tighten with gratitude. For someone she had just met, he seemed to understand exactly what was needed. They spent the mornings settling into the cabin. She learned how to make simple meals and take care of the baby's needs in this new environment. He guided her patiently, never rushing, always offering a calm presence. When she struggled to get the fire going or feed the baby properly, he simply stepped in, showing her how without making her feel incapable. Each small lesson, each quiet act of guidance, made her feel a little more grounded in this unfamiliar place. After breakfast, he suggested they explore the surrounding area. She felt hesitant at first, unsure if she could trust herself to navigate the roads and trails, but he walked beside her, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back. They moved slowly, allowing the baby to take in the fresh air in the sling. As they walked, he pointed out landmarks, the creek nearby, the main road leading into town, and even a few small shops that could be useful. She felt a growing sense of security knowing he had already mapped out their world for them. By mid-afternoon, they returned to the cabin, tired but calmer. The baby had fallen asleep in her arms, and she sat on the wooden floor while he prepared a small fire for warmth. They didn't speak much. Words weren't necessary. The silence between them carried understanding. She felt herself observing him closely, noticing how his eyes softened when he glanced at the sleeping child, the quiet strength in his posture, the way he seemed entirely in control yet gentle at the same time. He shared some of his history in small pieces, careful not to overwhelm her. He had faced dangers in the past, he said, rivalries and threats that shaped him into the man he was. She listened, her heart beating faster with each detail, but she didn't feel fear for herself. Somehow, knowing the challenges he had overcome made her trust him more. He wasn't perfect, he admitted, but he had learned how to survive, and he had learned how to protect those he cared about. As evening fell, they sat near the fire, the baby asleep in the crib nearby. She felt a quiet sense of connection growing between them. He taught her small ways to manage chores more efficiently and handle the baby safely. Each lesson was practical, but the care he showed made her feel more than instruction. She felt acceptance and slowly, a fragile kind of hope. She realized that in this cabin, with him, the baby, and the routines of the day, she could imagine something resembling a normal life. Before bed, he checked on the baby, then handed her a blanket. She sat by the fire, holding the warmth in her hands and thinking about the day. For the first time since arriving, she allowed herself to feel that maybe they had found a place where they could survive, and perhaps even thrive. The man had brought a calm stability she had never known, and though she didn't say it aloud, she felt the stirrings of trust, and maybe something more. The morning came quietly, with the sunlight spilling into the cabin, and the baby stirring in his crib. She watched him sleep for a few moments, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and relief. The man was already up, tending to chores outside and preparing breakfast. She admired the way he moved, efficient, careful, and steady. It was clear he had done this many times before, yet he made it look effortless. She felt a quiet reassurance in knowing that he could handle anything that came their way. After breakfast, he suggested she try riding a horse. She hesitated, unsure if she could manage it, but he guided her patiently. Step by step, he showed her how to sit properly, hold the reins, and balance herself. The baby was secured in a sling, safe against her chest. At first, her hands trembled and her legs wobbled, but his calm instructions helped her relax. She started to feel a small thrill, realizing she could do more than she thought. As they rode through the quiet fields near the cabin, she began to notice small details in the world around them, the way the sunlight reflected on the river, the sound of birds in the trees, and the soft breeze that cooled her face. For the first time in weeks, she felt like she was part of a living, breathing world, not just trapped in fear. The man rode beside her, guiding and protecting, but never rushing her. She started to understand that trust wasn't something that had to be demanded. It could grow slowly, naturally, if given the chance. When they returned to the cabin, she realized how much she had learned in just a few hours. He showed her how to care for the baby after the ride, checking the sling, making sure the child was comfortable and warm. She noticed the patience in his movements, the quiet way he handled every task, and she felt something new, admiration, mixed with relief. He made her feel capable, and in that moment, she realized that she wasn't entirely alone. They spent the afternoon organizing the cabin, cleaning, and preparing simple meals. He guided her when she struggled, but never made her feel incompetent. She found herself watching him carefully, noticing the way his eyes softened when he glanced at the baby, the way his jaw tightened slightly when he focused on a task, the way he moved with both strength and gentleness. She felt herself leaning on him in ways she had never imagined she could, trusting him with both her child and her own fragile sense of hope. By evening, they sat near the fire, the baby finally asleep in his crib. They talked quietly, sharing small stories about their pasts. He spoke of his childhood and the dangers he had faced, while she spoke of her own journey to this town and the struggles she had overcome. Each shared memory built a connection between them, a silent understanding that went beyond words. She realized that she was starting to feel something she hadn't allowed herself in a long time, a sense of belonging. As the day ended, she held the baby in her arms, feeling the weight of the small life she was responsible for and the weight of her own cautious hope. The man watched them both from across the room, his eyes calm and watchful. She felt safe, cared for, and even valued. The cabin, the man, and the baby together had begun to create a world that felt like a beginning, not just survival. For the first time since arriving, she allowed herself to believe that maybe they could build a life here, one step at a time. The morning began quietly, the baby still asleep as sunlight filtered through the cabin windows. She moved carefully, trying not to wake him, and found the man already outside tending to the small garden and checking supplies. He nodded to her with a faint smile, and she realized she felt calmer simply seeing him there. There was a steadiness in his presence that made her feel like maybe, just maybe, they could handle whatever the day would bring. After breakfast, he suggested they take a walk into the nearby town. She hesitated, unsure if it was safe, but he stayed close, walking beside her like a shield. As they passed the few shops and homes along the road, he pointed out the places that were friendly and those to avoid. She noticed the careful way he scanned the streets, as though always aware of threats she could not see. She realized that he carried a burden of responsibility, one that went far beyond simply protecting her and the baby. During the walk, he told her more about his past. There were rivalries, dangers, and mistakes that had left scars both visible and hidden. She listened quietly, heart beating faster, but she did not feel fear. Instead, she felt respect. This was a man who had faced danger head-on, who had survived when others would have failed. And yet, despite all that, he was patient, kind, and careful with her and the baby. That balance of strength and gentleness made her heart ache in a way she did not fully understand. Back at the cabin, they worked together to complete chores that had been neglected, stacking firewood, cleaning the small kitchen, and checking the baby's supplies. He showed her small tricks and shortcuts, explaining them slowly and clearly. Each lesson was practical, but she noticed the thoughtfulness behind his words, the way he seemed to care about her understanding and confidence. For the first time in weeks, she felt like she was learning not just to survive, but to live. In the afternoon, they practiced riding the horse again. She was still nervous, but he stayed close, guiding her hands, adjusting the baby's sling, and offering steady encouragement. She laughed when she nearly lost balance, and he smiled, a small, rare expression that seemed to touch her heart. Each moment spent together in these small, ordinary activities was slowly building a bond she could no longer ignore. It was quiet but powerful. As evening approached, they sat near the fire while the baby slept, sharing another conversation about their pasts. He told her stories of hardships and small victories, and she spoke of her journey to this town, her hopes and her fears. In the quiet of the cabin, words carried weight, and she felt the connection growing stronger. She began to feel that she could trust him completely, not just for safety, but with her heart. Before bed, she held the baby, feeling the warmth of his small body and the rhythm of his breathing. The man watched silently, his presence steady and protective. She allowed herself a rare moment of peace, knowing that, for now, they were safe together. The cabin felt less like a temporary shelter and more like the start of something permanent, a place where they could begin to rebuild their lives, step by step. The morning started quietly, with the baby waking up first and fussing softly in the crib. She gently lifted him, rocking him until he calmed down. The man was already up, preparing a simple breakfast, moving with quiet efficiency. She watched him for a moment, noticing the small gestures, the way he made sure the baby's blanket was snug, the careful way he poured the tea, the steadiness in his hands. These small acts gave her a sense of calm she hadn't felt since arriving in the town. After breakfast, he suggested she help with the chores outside. She hesitated at first, unsure of her own strength, but he stayed close, guiding her hands and showing her how to handle each task. She chopped kindling under his watchful eye, carried water from the well, and cleaned the small outdoor area. Every small success gave her confidence, and she felt a quiet pride in being able to contribute. The baby, strapped safely to her chest in his sling, seemed to sense her growing strength and cooed happily. Once the chores were done, he suggested they take another ride through the countryside. She agreed, a little nervous, but felt reassured by his presence. He walked beside her, adjusting the baby's sling, checking her grip on the reins, and offering quiet instructions. The rhythm of the horse beneath her, combined with the calm guidance of the man beside her, gave her a new sense of freedom. For the first time, she realized that life could hold moments of peace and safety even in an unfamiliar world. Back at the cabin, they worked together to organize supplies. She learned how to store food properly, care for the baby's clothes, and plan for the days ahead. He explained each step clearly, never rushing or making her feel inadequate. She began to notice the patience in him, the quiet ways he built her confidence. Every small task became an opportunity for connection, and she found herself relying on him more than she expected. In the afternoon, the man began telling her more about the town itself, its people, its routines, and the few places they could go safely. She listened closely, realizing how much he knew and how much he cared about keeping them protected. His words painted a picture of a life that was manageable, even promising, and for the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future where she wasn't constantly afraid. As evening fell, they sat together by the fire. The baby was asleep in the crib, and the quiet of the cabin felt like a small sanctuary. They shared a simple meal, and she noticed how the man's attention always returned to the baby, checking for comfort and warmth. In those quiet hours, she felt a bond forming, built not on words or grand gestures, but on shared responsibility, trust, and the understanding that they needed each other to survive and thrive. Before going to bed, she held the baby in her arms, feeling the weight of both the child and her cautious hope. He watched them silently, a calm presence in the room. She realized that, even after all she had been through, this man had given her a feeling she had almost forgotten: safety. She allowed herself to believe that they could build a life here, one step at a time, with the baby as the center of their fragile but growing family. The morning was quiet, the baby still asleep in his crib. She was making breakfast when she noticed footprints near the cabin door, unfamiliar and deliberate. Her stomach tightened, but the man remained calm, quietly checking the area outside. He reassured her with a few quiet words, explaining that some strangers sometimes pass through town, but they rarely cause trouble. Despite his calm, she could feel the tension in the air, a reminder that safety was never guaranteed. They spent the day reinforcing the cabin and preparing supplies. He showed her how to secure windows, store food, and keep watch without making it obvious. She learned quickly, her confidence growing with every small task. The baby played nearby in a soft blanket, and she realized that while danger existed, there were also moments of calm and safety that could be created with care and planning. In the afternoon, they took the baby on a short walk outside the cabin. She noticed the way he constantly scanned the surroundings, alert for any sign of trouble. She started to mimic his movements, learning how to sense potential danger while still enjoying the world around them. Slowly, she felt a sense of independence growing within her, a balance of caution and courage. They returned to the cabin as evening approached. She helped him prepare a simple meal, and they sat together near the fire. The baby slept peacefully, and the warmth of the room made her feel a rare sense of belonging. Their conversations were calm, but each exchange carried meaning. She started to see him as more than a protector. He was becoming a partner, someone she could rely on, someone who understood the fragility of her world. Night fell, and the man kept watch outside. She sat inside with the baby, listening to the sounds of the night and thinking about how far she had come in just a few days. She felt safer, stronger, and more aware of her surroundings. The sense of dread that had accompanied her since the train station was softening, replaced by a quiet hope that perhaps they could survive, and maybe even thrive, here. Before sleep, he returned and checked on the baby. She handed him over, feeling the trust between them deepen. He held the child securely, speaking softly, and she realized that this small gesture was a reflection of the larger bond forming between them. They were learning to rely on each other, building trust step by step, in silence and in small acts of care. She finally went to bed, holding a small blanket for comfort. Even though the threat of the unknown still existed, she allowed herself to rest, knowing that the man was keeping watch and that for the first time in weeks, she wasn't entirely alone. The next morning, he took her on a walk to gather supplies from the nearby town. She carried the baby in a sling, learning to manage the weight while watching her surroundings. He taught her how to move quickly if needed and how to stay calm under pressure. Each lesson built her confidence, and she realized she was slowly becoming capable of handling challenges on her own. They ran small errands in town. She noticed townspeople glancing at them, curious about the baby and the man who had arrived with them. He explained which people were trustworthy and which places to avoid. She listened carefully, storing every detail. She began to understand that survival wasn't just about strength, it was about knowledge, awareness, and trust. Returning to the cabin, they organized the supplies. He showed her how to store food, maintain water, and plan for emergencies. Each task reinforced the quiet rhythm of their new life. She felt more capable than she had in years, but also aware that danger could appear at any moment, requiring vigilance. After lunch, he suggested they practice riding again. She agreed, feeling more confident than before. The baby cooed in the sling as they walked along the quiet trails. With his guidance, she learned to navigate rough paths, adjusting her balance and grip. The small victories gave her courage, and she started to enjoy the time spent with him in these simple, everyday tasks. Back at the cabin, they tended to chores while the baby slept. They worked in comfortable silence, communicating with small gestures and shared glances. She noticed his patience and care, the way he adjusted to her mistakes without frustration. Trust and understanding were growing quietly, but strongly between them. That evening, they shared a simple meal and talked quietly about their hopes. He encouraged her to imagine a future here, even though danger could always appear. She allowed herself to dream just a little, recognizing the man's calm influence on her life. Before bed, she held the baby while he checked the perimeter outside. She felt a bond forming, a sense that they were building more than just safety. They were building a family, step by step, through patience, trust, and quiet care. The next day, the man noticed a few unusual tracks outside the cabin. They didn't match anything familiar. He stayed calm but explained that some people in the surrounding areas could be dangerous. She felt a nervous flutter, but trusted his judgment. He began teaching her how to identify threats and prepare for unexpected visitors. They spent the day reinforcing the cabin. She learned how to secure doors, block windows, and move quietly if needed. While doing so, she noticed the small gestures of care he extended to her and the baby, and she felt gratitude, mixed with a growing admiration for him. Their bond deepened quietly, shaped by both trust and necessity. Later, he took her to the edge of the woods to gather firewood. He taught her how to stay alert and read the environment, explaining how even small details could warn them of danger. She began to realize that survival required both awareness and composure, skills she was slowly learning from him. Returning to the cabin, they prepared a meal together. She noticed how naturally they worked as a team, moving in harmony without words. The baby slept peacefully nearby, and she felt the safety of their small world despite the tension outside. In the afternoon, he shared more of his history. He spoke of past rivalries and mistakes, but also of lessons learned and the importance of staying calm in dangerous situations. She listened quietly, absorbing every word, feeling more connected to him and the life he was trying to build for them. As evening came, they tended to the baby and lit the fire. She sat nearby, feeling the quiet strength of the man beside her and realizing how much she had come to rely on him, not just for safety, but for comfort, guidance, and companionship. Before sleep, she held the baby, noticing how calm and careful he was even after a long day. She felt a fragile sense of peace, knowing that together they could face challenges, protect each other, and continue building a life, one step at a time. The morning began with routine. The baby woke early, and she held him while he prepared breakfast. She felt a sense of comfort in these quiet moments, knowing that the small routines were shaping stability in their lives. He guided her through tasks, showing her how to handle the baby, manage food, and keep track of supplies. She noticed her confidence growing. She wasn't just surviving, she was learning to thrive. Each task, each lesson, strengthened her trust in him. They walked to the edge of town for supplies. Along the way, he warned her of people and places to avoid, explaining the subtle signs of trouble. She listened carefully, realizing that danger could appear anywhere, but knowledge and vigilance could keep them safe. Returning home, they worked together to organize and store the supplies. They moved quietly, speaking in small, purposeful sentences. She noticed how naturally they communicated without words, learning to anticipate each other's needs. After chores, they practiced riding. She was more confident now, able to guide the horse with his gentle supervision. The baby, calm and secure, seemed to sense their growing harmony. She felt a small thrill in realizing how much she had learned in such a short time. Evening came, and they sat by the fire, sharing stories of their pasts. She opened up about her journey, her struggles, and her hopes. He listened attentively, offering understanding rather than judgment. She felt a bond growing stronger, built on shared experience and trust. Before bed, she held the baby while he checked the perimeter. She felt a growing sense of security, a feeling she hadn't known for years. With him by her side, she allowed herself to believe that they could survive, adapt, and maybe even find happiness together. The morning was calm, with the baby sleeping a little longer than usual. She moved carefully, making sure not to wake him. He was already outside checking the surroundings, his movements deliberate and efficient. She felt comforted by his presence, noticing the quiet strength in everything he did. They prepared a simple breakfast together. He showed her small techniques for cooking and organizing supplies, explaining details patiently. She began to feel more capable and confident in this unfamiliar environment. The baby, safe and content, watched them with curious eyes. After breakfast, he suggested a longer walk to explore more of the surrounding area. She agreed, carrying the baby in the sling. He pointed out landmarks, shared information about local dangers, and taught her to observe subtle signs in the environment. She realized she was learning how to read the world in a completely new way. Back at the cabin, they completed daily chores. They moved in coordination, each anticipating the other's actions. The baby played quietly nearby, and she felt the small sense of harmony growing between them. She began to feel that this cabin, the man, and the baby together could become a true home. In the afternoon, he shared more of his history, focusing on lessons learned and moments of triumph. She listened, appreciating his honesty and the way he never made her feel like her past or fears mattered less. As evening came, they prepared a simple meal, and she noticed how naturally he included her in everything. She felt a quiet pride in learning, in surviving, and in connecting with someone who had become essential to her life. Before bed, she held the baby while he checked the perimeter. She felt a growing sense of trust, realizing that their bond had deepened not just through protection, but through shared effort, patience, and care. Together, they were creating a life, slowly and carefully, in a world that had once felt hopeless. The morning light filled the cabin as the baby slept peacefully in the crib. She held him for a few moments, feeling the gentle rise and fall of his chest, before placing him down to stretch and move around. The man moved quietly around the cabin, checking supplies and tidying things, his calm presence comforting her. She realized how much she had come to rely on him, not just for safety, but for stability and guidance. After breakfast, they walked outside together. The air was crisp, and the town lay quiet in the distance. He pointed out small details about the land, the forest edges, and the safe paths to the town. She began noticing the subtleties he had mentioned before, understanding why awareness mattered so much. It wasn't just survival, it was preparation for life in a place that could be unpredictable. Back at the cabin, they tended to chores. She chopped firewood, organized food, and even managed small repairs, all under his watchful eye. He guided her gently, correcting her mistakes without criticism. The baby played safely nearby, watching them with bright, curious eyes. She felt a sense of pride growing. She could do more than she had imagined. In the afternoon, they sat by the small fire, sharing quiet conversation. He told her about times he had failed and learned, the people he had trusted, and the lessons danger had taught him. She shared her own past, the struggles she had endured, and how afraid she had felt arriving in this town alone. Their stories mingled, creating understanding and closeness. As evening fell, they prepared a meal together. The baby slept nearby, his breathing calm and even. She noticed the small gestures of care he showed, offering her first bite, making sure her chair was comfortable, adjusting the baby's blanket. Every small act made her heart warm, and she realized the depth of her feelings was growing quietly but strongly. Before bed, she held the baby while he checked the perimeter. She noticed the way he moved, calm and alert, and felt reassured. She leaned slightly toward him, a silent acknowledgement of trust and connection. She realized that in just a few days, he had become essential to her life, more than a protector, more than a guide. That night, she fell asleep with a new sense of hope. They were together, the baby was safe, and she had begun to feel the possibility of a future, one that was uncertain, yes, but no longer frightening. She allowed herself to imagine a life where love, trust, and family could exist, all beginning in this small cabin. The next morning, sunlight spilled into the cabin, and the baby stirred happily in his crib. She lifted him into her arms, feeling the small weight of his body and the warmth of his life in hers. He smiled up at her, and she realized how much he had come to symbolize hope and new beginnings. The man moved quietly around the cabin, preparing breakfast and checking supplies. She watched him with appreciation, noting the steady, careful way he handled everything. She realized that he had become the center of their small family, someone she could rely on completely. After breakfast, they took a walk together, carrying the baby in his sling. They moved slowly, enjoying the quiet of the surrounding fields and the soft sounds of life around them. She noticed how naturally their steps matched, how the baby reacted to both of them, and how the sense of family felt real for the first time. Back at the cabin, they worked together on small projects, organizing supplies, fixing small repairs, and tending to the fire. She began to realize that safety and comfort could be built through effort and care, and that she wasn't alone in doing so. Together, they were creating a life worth living, one step at a time. As evening came, they shared another meal, and the baby played nearby. She looked at the man and noticed the way he watched her and the child, the quiet pride and care in his eyes. It struck her how much trust had grown between them, and she felt a deep gratitude for his presence, patience, and guidance. Before going to bed, she held the baby close, and he stood beside them, gently resting a hand on her shoulder. In that moment, she felt safe, loved, and understood. The fear and uncertainty of the past days had given way to a fragile but real sense of family, connection, and hope. That night, as she closed her eyes, she allowed herself to imagine a future in this small cabin, with a man by her side and the baby in her arms. She no longer felt stranded or alone. Together, they had found safety, trust, and the beginnings of love, a life that, though